Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us once again Dennis Zimmer, co-founder and CTO of Codenotary. Dennis, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Swapnil. Good to be here.
Yeah, I look forward to meeting you and talking to you at Cubecon as well. But today's focus is going to be, of course, to understand what you folks are going to be doing at Cubecon Detroit North American edition. But before that, I want to talk about, this is becoming a very interesting, important topic these days. Supply chain security, software bill of materials. We kind of assume that hey, security has kind of become a problem that has been solved in a way, not that they are tools, but that people understand the importance of security is no longer an afterthought. It's not someone else's problem. It's not on the back burner. But a few weeks ago, there was a massive Uber hack. It was totally unrelated. It was social engineering. But the problem is, if a companies like Uber scale, I mean, they actually pioneered some of the cloud native technology that we use today. And if those kind of companies can get compromised and they have a lot of sensitive data, we have to worry about a lot of other companies that are not as well prepared as they are. So that becomes even a more important topic to talk about it today. Before we get into all of that, I would take this opportunity, and would love to talk a bit about how would you define, SBOMs and their importance, their role in kind of improving your software supply chain security posture.
Actually, taking your example with Uber, despite being more of a social engineering attack, uh, actually the larger corporations are not immutable or invincible against these kind of attacks. And one of the issues is small or middle or large corporations. We all use open source components. We all use third-party components, not just open source, also closed source. And it's extremely hard to really have a complete transparency through everything that is inside of your applications. The moment there's some network communication happening or something like this, you can actually notice. But if it starts to encrypt your data, for example, it might be too late within a couple of seconds. And the big issue is always what is really inside of my software. So when I get a software that I can install or think about every single update and patch, the whole thing is going to change, right? So, and you also need to think of a kind of a timeline while you are using the software, that these dependencies change over time, but on the other hand, also vulnerabilities are being detected that were already part of former versions. So you ran it already for 6 months or so. The vulnerability was always there, but it has been exploited or exposed last week. So you need to know, okay, what happened between exposure and you're still running it. Or when it comes to more popular topics like a log4j, when we speak with companies, they say, okay, we still don't know where log4j still is in our environment. And the complexity is that you need to actually track from the start your applications. So you need to have a sort of a provenance. Where are applications coming from? What kind of components are there? Where are the components coming from? Are they maintained? Are there any vulnerabilities known? And the base of it, you can really think of as SBOM, so software bill of materials. The ingredients lists of all the components as part of your build, as part of your container image, and keeping track of it, and not just having a software bill of materials that lives in a file server or lives in a I would say, non-searchable way or non-actionable way, it doesn't do any good. So you need to have it updated whenever there's a new version coming up, whenever there's a new patch coming out. You need to have an updated software bill of materials as well. And while you could potentially generate one of them based on open source components, it's extremely hard to do that based on closed source components. So there's also every single software vendor out there needs to provide you these software bill of materials as well. And you need to be able to import them and use them as well as the auto-generated one. And at Codenotary, we built a kind of platform where you can integrate, import, export, and consume or generate the software bill of materials with all the information that you typically need. So it's about the license, it's about where do you use it, it's about known vulnerabilities at a given point in time, but also about maybe you have some sort of I would say, a policy in place. So Log4j is fine in application 1, but it's not in application 2 because one is isolated and the second one is public. And these are very, very important information. You need to know provenance, SBOM policies to also have a sort of a risk management in place. And we are just getting there. We probably are even a couple of years away from it before we really have this kind of transparency and this kind of control for software and applications. But we need to get started today, right? Actually, we should have started yesterday already.
Right, right. Sometimes I feel that we should be when we talk about sort of supply chain, we'll always give example of automobile industry or assembly lines. That's where you. But we should also take lessons from the safety that comes from the automobile industry. You don't install brakes and airbags after you buy a car. It comes pre-installed. It goes through all that. So all those security features are built into when the car is released. Similarly, when the software, before it hits public, whether it's a service or a product, all those features should be built in. But unlike an automobile, with software, security is not a product, it's a process. So you also have to keep up with that. It's not, you install it and you're done. Now, I want to talk a bit about Cubecon Kubernetes ecosystem as well. You folks were there at the previous Cubecon in Valencia. Talk a bit about what kind of discussions you had there, which also kind of not only help you gain the feedback from the community, your user customer base, but also what is happening in the ecosystem, which also help you refine your own offerings.
I would even start with the Cubecon in Valencia was kind of surprising because when we started to have discussions with customers, but also partners and just DevOps or DevOps leads and engineers, we figured out that the level of sophistication when it comes to automation, for example, is not extremely high right now. So it's getting started. So that means the CI/CD pipelines are not fully deployed yet. Some companies are still in the, I would say, early stages of it. So automation is not a given. That is one thing. And the other lesson learned was also how fast Kubernetes for production use is picking up. Is also not extreme. It's of course accelerating, but we are not 50% or somewhere close to it. When it comes to Kubernetes production use. So a lot of the functionality that you could leverage from a Kubernetes engine and the setup of it, you need to have ways to do the same with more legacy implementations, or I would say semi-automatic workflows. You basically split between the development environment and the production environment, but it's not the same CI/CD pipeline that is shipping it. It's really a manual process in between, with vulnerability scanning in between and so on. So we are also changed the way how the product works to consider you are still more, I would say, left of a CI, and you are actually getting more and more into the automation, and then also into the runtime, Kubernetes runtime environment. So we actually covered all the different stages, and we changed a little bit CLI's work. We changed a little bit how our integration works. And one of the big topics that we realized is search. So you actually want to have a full understanding of what is running in your normal system environment, in your container environment, and in your Kubernetes environment. And you want to have a search, including provenance. So where did something come from? What is the current version? Because ultimately you first want to answer the question, there is a new security advisory, am I affected? And if I'm affected, where? Is it just a staging environment or just some dead source code? Or is it my current e-commerce shop? So we worked a lot on improving search. That is something that we are going to show at Cubecon. Also, we have a demo ready. So if somebody comes to our booth, please actually also check out the deep search demo. At Codenotary, you can also check out news around Cubecon and, of course, the booth itself. And then we do something I would say, very innovative, and that is the runtime SBOM. So while a container image is on a registry and you can download it and you can start the container, you have typically policies around what happens inside of the container. It means somebody is entering a shell or somebody is replacing the file, but you don't necessarily know if the dependencies are getting updated or the SBOM needs an update actually because of a running container image. And that is something that we do now. We detect there is a dependency update in a container. We could block it potentially, so enforce it. But when it comes to the software bill of materials, we always then update it. So you see, yesterday the SBOM was completely different compared to today because your software just used an npm update or a pip update or whatever kind of package manager update, or somebody really replaced the dependencies on the file system.
We live once again not only in the multi-cloud hybrid cloud world, we still use software, source code, where we leverage it. We also use it, we are still using mainframe. Container images are there, and then Kubernetes. So can you talk a bit about the difference between for source code, container images, and Kubernetes bombs, and which problem you see is more immediate at this point or more challenging, and how once again Codenotary is helping?
So regarding source code, the issue is that is something that you always have typically. So if you have an open source, you always have also the source code, and some of the dependencies that are part of the source code are not being part of the actual build. So you always need to differentiate between the source code software bill of materials and the actual container image software bill of materials, because sometimes you only need dependencies during build time and not during runtime anymore. And what we see is that I would say the majority of companies are still on a source code level. So they actually maintain the software bill of materials. And then there is a build. So you either create a software bill of material of the build, but then you deploy it already. And it's not even a container or a container image. Then we see, of course, in the container image, so the next step of automation, I would say, that you create a microservice, and then you need to have provenance as well, because you need to have a container image SBOM and a source code SBOM. And the best is if you can correlate both, so you have an idea what was actually the source code and what was the source code commit that was actually used in my container image. And when it comes to the Kubernetes part, you actually have then a running container. And this running container could potentially also pull new updates. So you also need to have an SBOM based runtime that potentially change from the image.
Now let's talk about go back to Cubecon Detroit. Tell us a bit about your presence there. What kind of things people can expect? Not only that you'll be announcing, but also at your booth.
Mm-hmm. So we heavily improved search. So that is something that we learned in the last Cubecon, and we got so much interest based on, hey, I want to know first if I'm affected. I need to be able to search for my own metadata, but also for information about this application is allowed or this dependency is allowed in this deployment, but not in the other deployment. And we integrated all of this information to enrich the software bill of materials with runtime information, with metadata, with provenance data, and also the linking between source code container images. So with our new search, you can really search back and forth through the provenance, through the software bill of materials. And of course, you can get an answer if your applications are currently running in a container, in a build environment, in a CI, in a container, or on a server with just an Apache web server, for example. And the second thing is our runtime SBOM. So we are able to create, so first of all, we detect if a container is changing its dependencies. And we can also block it. So from an enforcement perspective, you could block any kind of package manager updates or application updates. Or you could just allow it, but track it. And then we also show you the differences and how a SBOM evolves from a container image to actually a runtime image, or a runtime image over a couple of days. That is something that we noticed quite often with certain deployments, that sometimes there's a kind of a cron job that takes place after the image runs a day or so, or maybe every day. And then the next day, the bill of materials and the versions of your dependencies look completely different. That also means the vulnerabilities look completely different based on the runtime. And that is something we also demo on Cubecon. So we have a demo ready at our booth.
Dennis, thank you so much for once again taking time out today and talk about this topic. And as we initially started discussion about the Uber hack, it was kind of a wake up call once again that if company like that size can be compromised, yes, we can always say, hey, it was social engineering, but social engineering. Uh, when it comes to security technology, and people have always been the core part, it was never about the technology solution. People has been a bigger problem either way. So thanks for also talking about that. And as I said, we look forward to seeing you at Cubecon, and also invite people to go and check out your booth. Thank you.